King Leonidas and the 300 Spartans, the true history of Thermopylae. In the annals of ancient history, few battles have captured the imagination of the world as powerfully as the stand of King Leonidas and his Spartans at Thermopylae. Popular culture often remembers it as the story of the 300, a desperate fight against overwhelming odds, a clash where courage itself became a weapon. But behind the legend lies a true story, one rooted in the politics of the ancient Greek world, the expansionist ambitions of the Persian Empire, and the realities of war in the 5th century before Christ. This is the true account of King Leonidas, the Spartan warrior king, the 300 Spartans, and the Battle of Thermopylae, told as history remembers it. To understand Thermopylae, we must first understand the world that created it. In the early 5th century BCE, the Greek world was not a unified nation. Greece was a patchwork of independent city-states, or polis, each with its own government, customs, and military traditions. Among them, Athens and Sparta stood out as the most powerful. Athens was a naval democracy, valuing trade, culture, and innovation. Sparta was a militarized oligarchy, a society built on discipline, hierarchy, and the warrior code. Their differences would define Greek politics, but in the face of a massive threat, even rivals could find common cause. That threat was Persia. The Persian Empire under King Darius I and his successor Xerxes I was the largest empire the world had yet seen. Stretching from the Indus Valley in the east to Asia Minor and Egypt in the west, it commanded vast resources, diverse peoples, and a formidable military machine. Greece, by contrast, was fragmented and small. But in 490 BCE, at the Battle of Marathon, the Athenians had humiliated Darius's forces, defeating a far larger Persian army and proving that the Persians could be resisted. Darius swore revenge, but he died before he could exact it. His son Xerxes inherited both the throne and the grudge, and in 480 BCE, he marched westward with one of the greatest invasion forces the ancient world had ever seen. Ancient sources, especially the historian Herodotus, give us staggering figures for Xerxes's army. Some claim over 2 million men, though modern historians estimate a far smaller but still massive number, likely between 120,000 and 250,000 soldiers, supported by a vast fleet of ships. Whatever the precise count, it was an army designed to crush Greek resistance by sheer weight of numbers. Against this tide of empire stood the small Greek polis, with their citizen militias and fragile alliances. To resist meant unity, and unity was never easy among the Greeks. At the head of Sparta at this time was King Leonidas, one of Sparta's 2 hereditary kings. Born into the Aegead dynasty, Leonidas was not originally destined for the throne. But when his half-brothers died, he rose to power. Trained from childhood in the agoge, the rigorous Spartan system of military education, Leonidas embodied the Spartan ethos of discipline, endurance, and loyalty to the state. By 480 BCE, he was already an experienced leader and warrior, chosen to command the allied Greek forces in the face of Xerxes's invasion. His role was not just symbolic. The Spartans were respected, even feared, across Greece for their martial skill and iron discipline. The Greeks devised a plan of defense. Their strategy was to block the Persian advance at narrow choke points, where numbers would matter less, and superior hoplite tactics could be brought to bear. The key position was Thermopylae, the Hot Gates, a narrow coastal pass in central Greece, pressed between the mountains on one side and the sea on the other. Here, the Persians' numerical advantage would be blunted, their vast horde forced to attack in waves against a small frontage. It was the perfect defensive ground, and it was here that Leonidas chose to make his stand. But why only 300 Spartans? The answer lies in religion and politics. At the time of Xerxes's invasion, Sparta was engaged in the religious festival of the Carneia, during which military campaigns were forbidden. The Spartan government, bound by religious custom, could not send the full army. Instead, they dispatched Leonidas with a small advance guard of 300 Spartiates, full Spartan citizens, each of whom was required to have a living son to carry on his family line. These were not just any soldiers, they were men chosen for both their valor and their ability to inspire. Accompanying them were allies, around 700 Thespians, 400 Thebans, and perhaps 7,000 other Greeks from various cities, though the numbers dwindled as the battle went on. In August of 480 BCE, Xerxes' vast host approached Thermopylae. Herodotus tells us that when Xerxes first observed the Spartans, he was astonished to find them calmly exercising and combing their hair. A traitor to Greek eyes, this behavior was a sign of readiness. Spartans prepared themselves before battle with deliberate care, showing contempt for the fear that gripped others. Xerxes demanded their surrender, commanding them to lay down their arms. Leonidas's reply became immortal, "Milan lave, come and take them." The battle began. For 2 days, wave after wave of Persian troops hurled themselves against the Greek line, but the narrow pass nullified their numbers. The Spartans, with their long spears, bronze shields, and disciplined phalanx formation, held firm. The Persians sent their elite immortals, the king's own guard of 10,000, but even they could not break through. The Greeks rotated their men, feigning retreats and then wheeling back into disciplined counterattacks. Persian arrows darkened the sky, but the Greek hoplites, with their heavy armor and shields, endured. Leonidas and his men fought with calculated precision, proving that courage and training could stand against empire. On the third day, betrayal changed everything. A local Greek named Ephialtes, seeking reward, revealed to Xerxes a hidden mountain path that bypassed the pass. Persian troops marched around and began to outflank the Greek position. Leonidas knew the battle was lost. He dismissed most of the allied forces, unwilling to see them slaughtered in vain. Remaining with him were his 300 Spartans, the 700 Thespians who chose to stay voluntarily, and a contingent of Thebans, though their loyalty was doubtful. Facing certain death, Leonidas resolved to fight to the end. The final stand of Leonidas and his men has echoed through history. Surrounded, with no hope of victory, they fought with ferocity. When their spears shattered, they drew their swords. When their swords broke, they fought with hands and teeth. Leonidas himself fell in the thick of battle, and the Spartans fought desperately to recover his body. The Persians eventually overwhelmed them, but the cost was high. The narrow pass was heaped with Persian dead, and Xerxes' army had been delayed for precious days. The sacrifice at Thermopylae became a rallying cry for Greece. Strategically, the battle was a defeat. The pass was lost, and the road to central Greece lay open. But psychologically and politically, it was a triumph. The courage of Leonidas and his men inspired the Greeks to unite more fully. At the naval battle of Salamis, later that year, the Athenians led a decisive victory that crippled the Persian fleet. In 479 BCE, at the Battle of Plataea, a united Greek force destroyed the remnants of Xerxes' army. The Persian invasion was repelled, and Greece remained free. The stand at Thermopylae had bought the time and inspiration necessary for eventual victory. The memory of Leonidas and the 300 Spartans endured long after the battle. The poet Simonides composed an epitaph for their tomb: "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie." This epitaph captures the essence of Spartan duty: obedience to law, to tradition, to the state, even unto death. For the Spartans, Leonidas and his men had fulfilled their highest calling. From a historical perspective, we must separate legend from fact. The number 300 is accurate for the Spartan contingent, but they were not alone. Thousands of other Greeks fought at Thermopylae, and their sacrifices should not be forgotten. The Persians, though slowed, eventually burned Athens, and the ultimate salvation of Greece came through naval and later land victories. Yet the symbolic power of Thermopylae is undeniable. It was a moment when a small band of warriors faced annihilation to defend their homeland, a moment when the ideals of courage, sacrifice, and freedom were embodied in human action. Modern archaeology and scholarship continue to study the battle. Excavations at Thermopylae have uncovered arrowheads, weapons, and evidence of the fighting. The pass itself has changed due to silting and geological shifts. In antiquity, the sea came much closer to the mountains, making the pass narrower and even more defensible than it appears today. Herodotus remains our main source, though his accounts mix fact with embellishment, and other historians such as Plutarch add details colored by later admiration for Sparta. Still, the broad outlines of the battle are clear, and its significance cannot be doubted. King Leonidas himself became more than a man, he became a symbol. For the Greeks of the classical period, he was the embodiment of Spartan virtue, of the hoplite ideal, of leadership that chose sacrifice over survival. For later generations, from Renaissance thinkers to modern democracies, Leonidas and his Spartans represented the defense of freedom against tyranny, the stand of the few against the many. The story has been retold in art, literature, and film, sometimes with accuracy, often with romantic exaggeration. Yet at its core remains the historical truth. At Thermopylae, in 480 BCE, real men stood and died for a cause greater than themselves. When we remember Thermopylae today, we often focus on the heroism of Leonidas and his Spartans. But the larger lesson lies in the unity of the Greek polis, however fragile, against a common threat. It was not Sparta alone, nor Athens alone, but the cooperation of many that saved Greece. The sacrifice at Thermopylae was a spark that lit the fire of resistance, a reminder that courage can inspire nations. As history echoes across the centuries, the story of King Leonidas and the 300 Spartans continues to resonate. It reminds us that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the human spirit can endure. It tells us that freedom is never guaranteed, but must be defended. And it shows us that sometimes, the measure of a man, or a people, is not in victory, but in how they face certain defeat. The Battle of Thermopylae was more than a clash of armies. It was a test of will, a confrontation between empire and independence, between tyranny and freedom, between fear and courage. Leonidas and his men may have fallen, but their memory has risen higher than any empire. Xerxes returned to Persia, his invasion failed. Sparta endured for centuries, and Greece gave the world ideas of democracy, philosophy, and art that outlived the Persian kings. And at Thermopylae, in the narrow pass by the hot springs, history was written not by the victors, but by the fallen. Thus ends the story of King Leonidas and the 300 Spartans, not the legend of cinema, but the history of flesh and blood, of men who fought because duty demanded it, and whose sacrifice gave birth to one of the most enduring tales of the ancient world. The hot gates still stand, and with them the memory of those who gave their lives there, obedient to their laws.